With the riots and protests for racial equality in the wake of George Floyd's death becoming more frequent and larger across the world, it has the potential to be the costliest US protest of all time. As the dust is still settling over the events that have rocked the world, it's too early to tell, but we're going to look at the most expensive protests in US history, why they took place, and the cost of the damage. Remember, you can support us by liking this video and subscribing if you want to see more like it, but for now let's continue our look at the costliest protests in history. We start in Cleveland, Ohio, and in the 1960s. The 60s were a difficult time for black society, but a decade which saw black people take action in America, and this action was starting to change society as a whole. The civil rights movement was coming to an end in 1968, but tensions were still high between black society and white-dominated institutions such as the police. On the evening of July 23, 1968, violence erupted between police and a black militant group led by Fred Evans within Cleveland's 6-square-mile Glenville neighborhood. When order was finally restored 3 days later on July 28th by the National Guard, 7 people were dead. The violence during these 3 days totaled $1.5 million and $10.2 million adjusted for inflation. That's a lot of money in insurance, but there are still 9 more protests that cost more for the US. Riots can stem from just one small incident, and that was the case in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1971. Police attempted to arrest a young man standing in a rowdy crowd, and this small incident escalated into a mass brawl where 9 people were injured. This led to outrage with the young people in the city, which led to a massive amount of damage, including overturned cars, shattered windows, looting, and severely damaged or completely destroyed buildings. Tear gas was administered, but this wasn't enough to keep the mob from overwhelming the police. Eventually, the New Mexico National Guardsmen were needed to disperse the riot. By then, the city had $17.5 million worth of damage in today's money. Another example of an innocuous incident, causing millions in damages now, as an open fire hydrant led to the National Guard being called to Chicago in 1966. An unplugged fire hydrant was providing an ad hoc water park for children at the time. Police ordered 17-year-old James Parker and his friends to close off the hydrant. When they refused, they were arrested, which sparked off riots from neighbours. Stores were looted and burnt throughout Chicago's west side until 1,200 National Guardsmen arrived on July 15. 5 days later, they were able to leave. In that time, $4 million of damage had been done, almost $30 million in today's money. With only 3 protests looked at so far, it's clear that riots cost a huge amount of money, and as we continue this list, the cost is only going to get higher. The next incident not only cost millions of dollars, but also 26 lives. It stemmed from the aftermath of a cab driver being arrested for allegedly driving around a double-parked police car when he was severely beaten by police officers. Rumours spread that the cab driver had died in police custody, and an angry crowd threw bricks and bottles at the precinct. This happened in Newark, New Jersey in 1967, during the height of the black-white tensions. More than 1,500 people were arrested in the resulting riot, and $78 million damage caused in adjusted funds. The next incident only occurred 5 years ago, but caused an estimated $24 million in damage across only 3 days. This was due to riots in Baltimore following the death of Freddie Gray, a 25-year-old who died after suffering a severe spinal cord injury while in police custody. This started with protests that were organised in downtown Baltimore. Protesters marched from the Baltimore City Hall to the Inner Harbor. After the final stage of the official protest event, some became violent, damaging at least 5 police vehicles and pelting police with rocks. This led to looting and incidents of arson. The next protest was less of a reaction to anything specific, but more an opportunistic event from several different streams of social unrest. In 1977, New York was facing a severe financial crisis, and its residents were terrified by the Son of Sam murders. The nation as a whole was suffering from a protracted economic downturn, and many think that this led to a crime spree during a citywide blackout that happened in stifling July heat. Following this blackout that lasted only a day, $28 million in losses were caused primarily by fires, looting, vandalism, and malicious mischief. That's a massive $110 in today's money. Arthur McDuffie reportedly led police officers on a high-speed pursuit in Miami in 1979. When McDuffie stopped, he raised his hands and said, "I give up." The police officers beat him to death and were later acquitted. This led to riots in the city that led to a burning 3-mile-wide riot in Liberty City, causing $187.5 million worth of damage adjusted for inflation. And this now leads us to the top 3 most expensive protests in US history. Los Angeles is responsible for 2 of these riots, and the first happened in 1965. In the predominantly black neighborhood of Watts, 2 white police officers clashed with a black motorist suspected of drink driving. They were being observed by locals, who deemed the suspect was another victim of racially motivated abuse. As the area had suffered from years of economical and political isolation, the incident served as a spark to a powder keg of unrest. The rioters eventually roamed over a 50-square-mile area of south-central Los Angeles, looting stores and torching buildings. In 5 days, the riots left 34 dead, 1,032 injured, and nearly 4,000 arrested, plus $285 million in damages in today's money. The second most expensive and second most lethal protest in US history happened in Detroit in 1967. The Detroit Police Department's Vice Squad often raided illegal drinking establishments in the city's poorer neighborhoods, and at 3:35 a.m. on July 23rd, they moved against a club that was hosting a party for returning Vietnam War veterans. The early morning police activity drew a crowd of onlookers, and the situation rapidly deteriorated. By dawn, the first fire broke out on 12th Street, and soon much of the street was ablaze. By mid-morning, every policeman and fireman in Detroit was called to duty. After a week of riots, 43 people were dead, and almost $300 million of damage in today's money was caused. This still doesn't top the list of the most expensive protests in US history. This goes to the LA riots of 1992, which left $775 million in damages at the time. This totals over $1 billion today. The protest started after police officers were acquitted of a beating of an unarmed African American man, despite the incident being filmed on amateur video. This led to outrage and protest turned to violence as rioters in south-central Los Angeles blocked freeway traffic, beat motorists, wrecked and looted numerous downtown stores and buildings, and set more than 100 fires. This has echoes of the incidents seen this year with George Floyd, and it remains to be seen if the aftermath of that will surpass the LA riots as the most expensive protests in US history. These are the top 10 most expensive riots in US history. Do you think we'll see change and avoid riots in the future? What are your reactions to the huge cost of damage over the years? Let us know in the comments. Please like this video if you've enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for plenty more like it. Thanks for watching.